Hello, hello, hello. The older I get, the more things actually start to get frustrating for me. And I think the reason why is because the more experiences I have, the less of a tolerance I have for stupid bullshit. And the more I realize that problems continue because they almost rely on people not working at solving them. You know, if you want my real life examples of this, right? If you have a workplace where the management expects workers to have nothing but unbridled respect and obedience, but also expects them to think for themselves, but then blames them for thinking for themselves, and careless policies and bad workers who aren't punished because you're almost rewarded for not doing things at your job, because when you do things, those things are then therefore criticized by multiple contradictory policies, thus burning out the only workers that actually want to do things. You have a toxic work environment, and only through diagnosing the problem and solving it and working towards managing your people in such a way as you understand your employees, can you really work towards solving that? And one thing that pissed me off at my job was that a lot of the time, the things that I was told, and this has been true for most of my life, the things that I have been told are things that essentially put every ounce of responsibility onto you, even if it should not be the case. And it is essentially accepting unfair situations because somebody wants to make it unfair. And normally, the people that benefit from those situations being unfair are the ones that tells you that it should be unfair. So the management would often say things like, you're supposed to listen to your boss. It doesn't really matter what your boss tells you so long as it's not illegal, blah, blah, blah. And it gets to a point to where you'd have multiple supervisors contradicting each other, and then you would try to do what one person says, get blamed for that, and then all three or four or five supervisors will be standing together in a room acting as though they're in agreement. And the one that told you the contradictory policy normally stays silent. And you're just responsible, no matter what. Uh, and that was very frustrating. It was very frustrating, and it was basically saying, like, you need to be responsible, you need to think about these things, you need to do what you're told, but also we're going to punish you if you're doing what you're told. And it's just an excuse, like, because, and I don't want to come off as saying that personal responsibility shouldn't exist, because personal responsibility is one of the most important things about being an adult. Being responsible for your own actions and your own problems is something that you need to severely be able to work on, to account for, and be successful at if you want to be a successful person. There's nobody that's disputing that. But if you're in a relationship with somebody and you have problems in that relationship and the other person has problems in that relationship, and both people are interested in solely blaming every single problem onto the other while diverting responsibility from themselves, you have a situation where even if one person admitted to having faults, it's not going to work out. I had an ex where she had to deal with some of my mental issues, and to be quite honest with you, we didn't like each other. And the problem that I had in that relationship is, no matter how many times I admitted being wrong, it was always used as a weapon against me, because you're also supposed to have a spine. And that's one of the contradictory things we tell you too, is you have to have a spine. You have to have a spine, you have to stand up for yourself, you can't let people take advantage of you, but you have to let people take advantage of you. Only certain people. And it's not effectively building communication or relationships or teamwork. It's about being obedient until people need to obey you. And that is the nature of the beast, so that people would normally say. You can get a lot more out of people if you can get them to respect you than if you were to just constantly and vigorously insult them, put them down, and blame them for every single thing. Why do I say this? Because this is kind of what happens in day-to-day life. People are constantly blamed for things, and those things are used against those people under the guise of personal responsibility, to a point to where you have situations where people can apply to 800 plus jobs and get nothing back. You can go to college and get charged so much money that you will almost never pay it off. And you aren't really likely to get a job to pay for it to begin with. You can be in a situation where you need to have health insurance, and the only means that you can really do it is by getting a job, and the job doesn't have to give it to you. And so you're basically told to find a better job, but that's the entire means of which you can do so is completely determined by factors that you have no control over. And so what ends up happening is we have a lot of homeless people. We have a lot of people who a very basic doctor's visit could potentially lead them down a path to where they can get very cheap, effective medical treatments, such as medications that can be used in short term instead of long term, keeping track of things, blood work to make sure that you're moving in the right direction to prevent long-term diseases like heart disease, diabetes, and potential cancer-causing habits that you might be having. And it's to a point in which people are starting to not believe in personal responsibility, and that's where it's getting dangerous. We use the excuse of personal responsibility so much that it almost becomes our biggest weakness. Why is that? Like I said, if you're in a relationship where you are trying to take responsibility for your actions, but your partner is not trying to take responsibility for their actions, what happens? Everything becomes your fault. And if everything is your fault, then clearly you're the only one that needs to work on anything. And if you're the only one that's working on anything, especially if the other partner does have problems, that's going to do one of a few things. It's going to put you in an abusive relationship where you are basically incapable of being right, which is what happens in most workplaces, in my opinion. It's what happens in a lot of society. It's what happens to a lot of poor people, and it's what happens to a lot of homeless people. It's why homeless people are regularly talked about getting shot on television by beloved comedians nowadays, because we have believed in personal responsibility to the point to where we take humanity away from people. We have people arguing that empathy can be a sin because it's dangerous, but also they're empathetic to first world white people that kind of sort of maybe aren't really happy about their religious situations. It's kind of ridiculous. It's very silly and it's very frustrating. You cannot solve problems if you cannot solve a problem involving multiple people if not everybody is willing to admit their contribution to the problem. It's going to harbor resentment, because if you are constantly being told that you're wrong, what happens? You start to get negative and you start to feel hopeless. You start to feel depressed. You start to get to a point to where you feel like there's nothing you can do correctly, in which you feel like you can actually have a meaningful moving forward in that dialogue. And so what ends up happening is people hate each other more. And then the final thing, personal responsibility becomes meaningless. Because if everything is my fault, I don't know where in my life it is actually my fault. I don't know what I need to do more. I don't know what I'm doing too much of. I don't know if I'm trying hard enough or trying too hard, or if I'm putting in a good amount of effort but I need to slightly tweak things. I don't know if I actually have mental health issues or if it's being caused by constantly being fucking told that I'm wrong about everything. I don't know, because I am faced with somebody whose entire goal, and this is true for your boss, this is true for many relationships, this is true for our politics. If you are a Republican, it is all the Democrats' fault. If you are a Democrat, it is all the Republicans' fault. It is full. Our society is full of people who is so interested in not accepting any personal responsibility and putting personal responsibility onto the other person while claiming to respect personal responsibility, that personal responsibility just becomes another tool of pointing the finger at somebody else. If you are incapable of finding humor, flaws, and a little bit of truth in something or an opinion that does not match with yours, then I think you're part of the problem. And to be honest with you, that's a very hard thing for humans to do, because we're very tribalistic and we aren't wired for the wide, complex problems that we have for today, and to the point to where we have to simplify our problems to have very simple opinions to something that's a little bit more complicated, which is why nuance almost always shows that everybody is either mostly wrong or there's one person that's less wrong than the other person. And that's what research, nuance, understanding, information science, any sort of reputable research, any sort of findings in our statistics normally shows that everybody is mostly wrong or one person is less wrong than the other. And even then, those things can be flawed. Why do I say this? Because we have a lot of politics in our country, and right now we have a lot of very arduous, sensitive, and dangerous political situations happening. And people who were at one point very interested in politics during the presidency now are no longer interested in it. They're no longer interested in learning about it. They're no longer interested in hearing about it. They are only interested in finding memes to blame other people because they don't want to find out what their own party's dirty laundry is. Why do I say that? Because the party that has said that foreigners are the ones that are ruining our country now has a foreigner ruining our country by having unlimited access to our government and our sensitive information, having people who aren't even old enough to rent a car, and not to mention the fact that there are stories of Elon Musk coming here illegally to begin with. So the entire conversation that we've had about this is not only completely meaningless, but it seems to me that we only really care about foreigners and people in general if they're wealthy enough. Everything in our country has become pay to play. And it has gotten to a point to where personal responsibility, politics, irrelevant conversations, things like transgender people, black people, Hispanic people, white people, Christians, atheists, socialists, capitalists, are just things that we use to argue with each other while our government ignores our problems. If you do not think that it is the government's place to solve problems, then do not call 911 when something happens. Do not call 911 if you have a medical emergency. Do not call the fire department if there's a fire. Because people who argue for small government always seem to like those aspects of government because they're very useful. And those people very often do not see the value in other aspects of our government. There are people in this country that want to abolish the Department of Education, meaning you won't have a place to put your kids while you go to work without paying a ridiculous sum of money. Because I don't know if you know this, daycare is a luxury at this point for a lot of people, and many people can barely afford it. And some people need to have it because their kids aren't old enough to go to school. Our kids, however flawed our educational system is, still need to be in an environment where they can learn things. What we teach our kids is what we're going to get out of them as adults, which is one of the many problems in our educational system, but it is not a reason to abolish it. There are people who want to have everybody only have private schools. There are people who want to argue for children to go to work, as if this wasn't a problem in the 1800s of kids having to stick their little arms in machines and losing their arms because there was unsafe and unmanaged working conditions, to a point to where kids just fucking died at work. We have people who want kids to go to work and who want people's entire lives to be about work, but we don't really need that. People want it, and the people who want it and the people who are arguing for it are people who make more money than you or I can possibly understand. And I want people to understand that, is that the amount of wealth that some people have in this country is so massive that it's almost a trick for the human brain that these people make you think that they work hard for it. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that CEOs don't work hard, but are you going to sit there and try to convince me that Jeff Bezos worked harder than a police officer who got shot? Or a Mexican who works in a garden 12 hours a day, 5 days a week? Or any construction worker for that matter? Or any construction worker who's an illegal immigrant who doesn't have to have any actual fucking rights at work, and they can just call ICE whenever they start asking for more. We live in a parody of a country. Our country has become a joke because we forget to hold the power responsible. When it's your political team, because politics have become nothing but another thing for people to root and cheer and ignore whenever it's inconvenient. It's basically the fucking Super Bowl every time we have a presidential race, and your Senate and congressional races are basically just college games where some people care about it, some people watch it because it's just on, and most people don't really give a shit. And that's kind of what our world has turned into. Everything has turned into a commodity and a game where it is everybody's task to point blame, responsibility, and the problems onto you, while they get paid tax dollars to solve these problems. We pay taxes for salaries and departments of people who then have politicians that basically say, we're not going to actually use any of these resources to help you. And we're not going to actually use any of these resources to solve problems. We think that you should have to pay for a subscription. We're getting to a point where we're probably going to have somebody dumb enough on TV say that we need to privatize policing. And if you don't agree with private policing, then you have to admit that some things have to be ran by government, and that this Department of Government Efficiency thing is not probably the most conducive way of going about this problem. Willy-nilly cutting spending and taxes and departments left and right is not the way to solve the problem of overspending, especially if we have people who get paid giant because they're corporations, because they're businesses. BP Oil gets like, I think, over $1 billion every single year because they're an oil company. Foreign nations get paid billions of dollars from us because they're our political allies, and we want to step our foot into these conflicts, kind of, to basically make a geological statement. There are places that we can save money, but these are the places that these people never argue that we could save money. And almost always, there's more money for prisons. There's more money for the things that they do like. It's just they don't like things that might actually help you and prevent you from going to prison. This is the problem that I have with society nowadays. If you think that private policing are a good idea, then I want you to imagine this hypothetical situation. You call 911 and you are told that you do not have a subscription, and so therefore no police officer will come right now, but you can, unless if you pay a one-time fee, which is 10 times the cost of the monthly subscription. So you get a monthly subscription, which is about probably, let's say, $100 a month. Let's call it police insurance. You pay $100 a month, and then you have somebody coming in and stealing more than $500 worth of stuff. I think that's a felony right now. It's either $500 or $1,500. Let's say $500. More than $500, which is felony theft. And you call your police insurance to try to make a report, and they say, well, since it's more than $500, your current subscription doesn't cover felonies. It only covers misdemeanors. For felonies, it's $150 a month. Okay, can I upgrade? Yeah, but since you have the misdemeanor subscription, we can't really cover you right now. Well, that's not really fair. Well, okay, maybe we can make an exception, but you still have to pay the deductible, which is $300. This is how health insurance works, by the way. This is what we do with health insurance. It's business practices that you would not accept anywhere, in both the free market and in the public market. You don't get charged money when a firefighter comes to put your house out. You don't get charged money if EMS shows up and checks on you. You get charged money if they drive you to the hospital, because for some reason that's the only thing that EMS does that costs money. But if they show up and they check on you, you're fine. The moment you step into a hospital, though, everything is commodified. Everything is overcharged. We have people in this country who get charged $60 for fucking bathroom tissues, because everything is priced to the point to where they have entire teams of people whose job it is to figure out who pays what. And almost always they give discounts to insurance companies. But meanwhile, they use the large prices of the hospitals to justify charging you large deductibles, because the deductibles that you normally pay for large surgeries or MRIs or other things of that nature, unless if it's a particularly expensive surgery, can actually be the cost of actually doing it. And a lot of this probably is going to be a little bit inaccurate, but my point still stands. If you go to a restaurant, you have a menu. You know how much a burger costs at that restaurant. You know how much the French fries cost. You know how much your drinks cost. The menu will have to tell you whether or not you have free refills or you have to pay for every single refill. The menu will give you an approximation of the calories that you're consuming. It doesn't have to be accurate up to a certain point, but it is an approximation. Some places are more accurate than others, and most of the time, if you're eating at a restaurant, you're not really too concerned about calories, but my point still stands. There's also an expectation of service. There's also an expectation that the food is going to be somewhat of a reasonable price, or at least enough to where you feel like you're paying for a decent night out. All of these things contribute and are a result from the free market. If a restaurant is too expensive, less people will eat there. If the food isn't good, less people will eat there. If the staff is rude, so less people are going to eat there. And so the business has a benefit and a motivation to keep prices just low enough to where people feel like they're actually getting a good money's worth, while using cheap enough ingredients to elevate them and making enough money to try to actually pay for their employees. They're trying to have it just enough to where they can maximize their profits. Insurance companies don't do that. There are laws that require you to have it. You have to get it through your job, because if you don't get it through your job, it's significantly more expensive. You are expected to have these things. You don't have to go to a restaurant ever your entire life. You might have to go to a hospital, and you might get told that an expensive medical procedure is needed or you will die. Last time I checked, the last time I went to Chili's and I got a burger, they didn't say, if you don't eat this, you're going to die. And I'm sure if they did, and if it were true, they could probably charge me $2,000 for that burger and get away with it. But no, an IV costs less than $1, but you get charged $100 for it or $200 for it at a hospital. We live in a joke of a time where everything is an excuse to charge you more money. Everything is an excuse to not use your tax dollars towards it, but you're still taxed for it. And because you're still taxed for it, people look at the taxes and say, we need to get rid of the taxes. No, we need to make laws that force these people to provide the things that you actually need. Or we need to get rid of these people and have an actual government program with the taxes that we have to give these things that we need. But it's a joke of a nation, and you can't suggest that without being called a communist or a socialist. And people will point to things like Great Britain. Great Britain, who's having a lot of problems with their healthcare because their Conservative Party cut funds for their universal healthcare. They cut the funds for it, and then they point at the problems that they have after cutting the funds and say, hey, this is why universal healthcare doesn't work. We should probably try to get rid of it. It's the oldest fucking trick in the book that nobody knows about. We have all of this money, and almost always it goes to everybody but you. And then you are told that you need to have personal responsibility and you need to work hard for it. So you get a job. That job does not pay you enough to pay your bills, or it barely pays you enough to pay your bills. And anything that happens, if you get so much as a flat tire, you might be fucked. Unless if you get a credit card. And if you have credit card debt because you need to pay for these random expenditures that come up, you're told that you're not financially responsible. But you also need to have a credit card and build your credit. You were then told that you were selfish if you ask for more money. You were told that you were selfish if you ask for better working conditions. You were told that you were selfish if you want better benefits. You were told you were selfish if you want these things that the government basically tells you that you have to get through your job. Which, by the way, the government also collects taxes for. We pay more in taxes than many countries pay for their universal health care. And we don't have universal health care. And I am told to sit here, shut up, don't worry about it, don't talk about it, you can't control it, don't be upset about it. And then the people who say that are also the people who have no idea what happens in our government. They have no idea where their tax dollars go. And to be honest with you, I think it's partly the reason why our government feels like they can get away with whatever they get away with. People only complain about presidents and politicians they don't like. People only speak up about presidents and politicians they don't like. But nobody actually pays attention to what's happening. Nobody pays attention to what we're voting for, unless if it personally directly affects them. The quote that keeps coming up nowadays is the one from, I think it happened during Nazi Germany, where they said, like, you know, first they came for the socialists and I didn't say anything because I wasn't socialist. Then they came for the Jews, but I didn't speak up because I wasn't Jewish. And then they came for me, but when they came for me, nobody was around to speak up for me. And the problem is the anxiety and stress that comes with politics, that comes with understanding what happens with your government, that comes with all of these external factors that have nothing to do with your life, are things that affect you. And if they don't affect you, they're going to affect people that you don't know. And eventually, there will be something that will affect you. And all of a sudden, that will be the most important thing that happens in the world when it affects you. And then, what's going to happen when something actually affects you? The people around you are going to look at you and say, that's not my problem, I don't care. And then nobody's going to vote for it. Nobody's going to hold their politicians accountable. Nobody's going to write letters. Nobody's going to call their senators. Nobody's going to vote for somebody else. Nobody's going to do anything. And the problem will persist. And eventually you will get fucked if you're not already fucked.